Hi, everyone. My name is Gretchen Rowe, and it's my very great pleasure to host these two lovely ladies today to talk about something that is a big issue with so many of you. We all participate in our Facebook groups in conversations with you all. Everyone who serves Matthew C. in a customer service capacity has participated in Facebook group conversations, in social conversations, in conversations at conferences. And we've all had similar context conversations of, do we have to do it the way you designed it? And the truth of the matter is, we're here to answer that question today. So I'm delighted to welcome you all. My name is Gretchen Rowe. My husband and I homeschooled 6 children, 21 years. I almost got those numbers backwards, 21 children, holy mackerel. 6 children, 21 years. We graduated 4 from high school homeschooling. The 5th one was homeschooled to high school, and our last one was homeschooled to middle school, and he is a senior in high school this year. So I'm about at the end of my homeschool journey, as are my colleagues, Lisa and Kathleen, and I will allow them to introduce themselves. Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Chimento. I am a customer success consultant and a placement specialist here at Demme Learning. And I have homeschooled my own 4 kids from kindergarten through graduation for 25 years. We used Matthew C. for all 4 kids. And it is my great pleasure to now be able to pay forward. I feel that's the way I feel about it. Pay forward the blessing that I was given when so many veteran homeschool moms lent their wisdom to me. They shared their experiences and they supported me along their way. So it's really a joy to be able to do the same.
Kathleen?
Hi, I'm Kathleen Calabrese. We have 2 children, and I've homeschooled both of them all the way through for 21 years. I just graduated my youngest. We use Matthew C. all the way through. That's the one curriculum that I used all the way through. It worked well with both of them, even though they're completely different type of learners, but it worked well, and we enjoyed it. So I used that all the way through. I'm not sure if I mentioned I work in customer service at Demme Learning. And as Lisa said, I'm also grateful that I get to share what I've learned through my 21 years of using Matthew C, that I get to share that with others. I'm grateful that I get to do that.
Absolutely. And, you know, we have so many things that we want to talk to you about today. So many of you have asked questions. I want to make sure that you all are aware that I am monitoring the chat and the Q&A. I should clarify that. The Q&A is the chat. And so I am monitoring that. So if we say something along the way today that comes up as a question in your mind, please feel free to ask a question. We want this to be valuable to you. And I think we're going to begin today with Lisa talking about the importance of placement.
Right. So you may or may not be aware, Matthew C is not a grade-based course. It is skills-based. And so it does differ in a number of ways from a typical grade-based math curriculum that uses what's called a spiral approach. In those courses, they teach a great many concepts every year, but they teach a little bit about each of those concepts. And then they spiral around the following year and they hit those concepts again. Sometimes what happens is there will be gaps in a student's learning because they just didn't have enough time with any one concept that maybe was challenging to them and they needed a little more time. But when you've got a preset schedule and either the teacher in your child's school or the curriculum that you're using as a homeschooler says, okay, it's time to move on to the next lesson, then you have to move on. Matthew C does not work that way. We use what's called a mastery approach. And so we want to give students as much time as they need with each concepts before moving forward to the next one. Because math is a very naturally sequential topic. The concepts build on each other cumulatively. And so we want to give students that time. So when a student is coming to us, no matter what level they're in, we want to first evaluate what that student has mastered, what skills they have mastered, and then place them appropriately. If you place them by grade level, you may be placing them too high or too low, and then you won't have the same success that you would have if you had placed them where they are. So really stop and think about it this way, because we do talk to a lot of people and we hear words like, well, I want to catch them up, or I don't want my child to be behind. The problem is, if a student doesn't know something, you can't make them know it. You can help them learn it, but first you have to identify what it is they don't know. And so we want to help them identify if there are any gaps, find out where they are and meet them where they are, and then help them progress from that point. So for Matthew C, proper placement is critical for success.
And I think it's very important as you're evaluating curriculums, if you're not a Matthew C user, or if you're wondering about this program, some of you are from the questions you have asked, to recognize that Matthew C is the homeschool curriculum that was designed for a tutorial environment. In most homeschool mathematics curriculum, they have been adapted from a classroom. So the goal there is to keep a group of students busy. And that is not Matthew C's goal. Matthew C's goal is that one-on-one tutorial experience. And I've asked Kathleen to explain what we think it should be so that we can have an appropriate starting place. And then we're going to dive into some greater explanations. So Kathleen, as a new parent of Matthew C, what should my expectations be for getting the most out of the materials?
Sure. Well, okay. So first to say, from the primer level all the way up through Algebra 1, there's 5 components. So there is the instruction manual, the DVD, the student workbook, the student test book, and the manipulatives. And really want to have all of those components because they all work together in order for your child to master that level, whatever level that is. Geometry and up does not have manipulatives, so there's 4 components. So within those 5 components, you want to typically start with a video. Beginning of each lesson, you're using the video for the instruction to teach this, what is the concept that we're going to learn in this lesson. And there are even practice problems in the video going through the concepts and showing how to do it with the manipulatives. Typically, I always watch the videos with my children. You're certainly welcome if you prefer to watch the video on your own and then reteach your child. I like to have my children watch it with me. They also enjoyed watching the video. For 21 years, my children said that Mr. Demme was their math teacher, not me. And I was okay with that. But they watched the video with me, and then I would have them work through the problems that he was doing on the board. We paused the video all the time. We would always pause and do it. And he would even say that, pause and do it at home. So we would do that. And then once we were finished with the video, then I would open up the instruction manual. The instruction manual has much of the same information that's in the video, but often there is more in there and there may be extra practice problems. So I would go through with the instruction manual with my student. If there's practice problems, we're using the manipulatives and we're working out those problems. And the way we do that is through the build, write, say method. You're building the problem, you're writing it down, and you're saying it. All of those steps are important to do that. First, I'm modeling it for my student, how to do that, and then I'm having my student build, write, say it back to me. From there, I have an idea that my student has a good understanding of this concept. So now I can start with the lesson practice pages. So now I start with lesson practice page A. I give them that page and have them do that. That would probably be enough for one day. The next day, when we come back, I would typically work out a problem first for my student. Again, modeling, showing them with the blocks, doing the build, write, say, just reminding them that this is how we do the problems. And then I have them do lesson practice B. Now, from there, if I feel like that they have a really good grasp of this concept, now I want to test for mastery. So the way that you test for mastery is one of or both ways. For math facts, can they say the math fact within 3 seconds without counting on their fingers or counting in their head? And as far as the concept, can they teach it back to you? When you think about it like that, if we know how to do something, we can teach someone else, right? So if they can teach that concept back to you, that's a good indicator that they mastered that concept. If my student shows me that they have mastered that concept, then I'll go ahead and do 1 or 2 days of the systematic review pages, which those pages are covering everything that they've learned up until this point, because I want to keep reviewing and make sure that everything is staying fresh with them. And then from there, at the end of the week, I can do an application and enrichment page. I can do the test page. I can do both. And once they've completed that, we celebrate, because now they're ready to move on to the next lesson.
Lisa, you told me something yesterday that we always learn from our parents, and I wonder if you would share that, because I think this is the perfect place to add that component, particularly with the commentary on build, write, say.
Yeah, I got a really excellent email from a parent yesterday who was just starting with Matthew C. And I had shared something with her that Gretchen actually shared with me, that the say part of build, write, say is sometimes met with reluctance from some students, and they maybe feel uncomfortable speaking it out loud. But that say part is very important. Each part, the build and the write and the say, are equally important. You're engaging a variety of senses in this exercise, and the brain is taking that information through those different sensory channels, and it's helping that student to learn better in all of those ways. So you want to make sure that they're doing all of them. But this particular mom had a brilliant thing. She said she started it with her daughters, and they were a little reluctant to do the say part. And she said to them, this does not mean that you're babies or that you're not smart, but this is for your brain. And so the say part has to be done, as well as the build and write. And she said it just changed their total outlook on it, and they began to just work with it in a very willing way. And I'm so blessed by that. I couldn't believe that she said something to me that I hadn't thought to say that way. And I thought it was so effective and such a brilliant way to put it. One thing that I'd like to add to what Kathleen was saying, when she was talking about the methodology of those days, that what she was sharing was the perfect way for students who are entering that level and learning those concepts for the first time. There are sometimes, however, kids who are coming to us from another curriculum, and maybe they know some of the concepts that are in that level better than others. So there may be some review material for them, and a parent might feel like, oh, okay, we just watch the video and then we'll move on, or we'll just do 1 page in the workbook. If you're going to do fewer pages, that's perfectly okay, because this is a mastery approach, but don't skip all of the review pages. Math is a lot like a foreign language. If you're not using it regularly, it's very easy to forget some things. It's why you see that at the end of a summer, if your kids haven't done math all summer, and then you're dealing with having to review this stuff in the fall. So it's a good idea to make sure that they're getting some review with each lesson, so that they're keeping older concepts fresh.
Thank you, Lisa. That's important. Kathleen, I wonder if you could talk about the element of anxiety.
Sure. Okay, so unfortunately, math comes with some anxiety. Multiple reasons are there's a lot of testing in it that causes anxiety. It's often math is taught with right and wrong answers, where maybe we're not allowing enough flexibility in that, because we think it has to be the exact answer, and we're not maybe trying to allow the child to explain how they got to that answer to better figure out the answer. If we're just marking it wrong, that causes anxiety. And then there's a myth that people are either born mathy or they're not, which unfortunately some people might buy into that. And then we also have often we have parents who say, well, I'm not good at math, so I'm not confident that I'm going to be able to teach it well. And unfortunately, sometimes they can pass that anxiety on to their children. Their children will see that, mom's not confident in it. She's not strong in it. How am I going to learn how to do it? So sometimes that can cause, some issues between the parent and the child, where they're both feeling a little anxious just going into it.
I think it's important for us to recognize that math lends itself, because it is sequential and cumulative, to a progression of understanding. And here might be an important place to explain the difference between a true mastery-based program and what the vast majority of mathematics programs are, which are incremental in their presentation. In the homeschool world, we often say spiral. And we have the idea that that keeps concepts in front of our student longer. The challenge with that is whomever designed that incremental presentation has predetermined how often a student needs to see something. And if that predetermination is your student needs to see a concept 3 times before it falls out of rotation, and your student actually needed a 4th presentation, then their understanding is forever more incomplete. So the purpose of a Math-U-See experience is to teach a singular concept at a time until the student can teach back to you, so that they have the highest opportunity to put that information into their head in the right place to be able to recall it later. And Lisa, can you elaborate a little bit on why Math-U-See is laid out the way it is?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, you had asked me something before I started going there, and I think I kind of veered off. Kathleen hit on it again when she was talking about that process that students use. And I wanted to just mention that for parents, this is an opportunity for them, especially if they're not confident teaching math, to be able to model for their students how to respond when something is difficult, when things get frustrating. And there is a process, and sometimes that process means I'm going to sit with it for a short period of time, not too long. We often say to parents, you can add 3 minutes to your child's age, and that's about the amount of time that you want to spend on new material for better understanding and longer retention. But also, if the learning isn't complete after that first 15 minutes, that's okay. Set it aside. You might even need to wait until the next day to come back and look at it again, and then see it with fresh eyes. Your brain has been working while you've not been looking at it, while you've been resting from it. Your brain is still taking that information and sorting it and organizing it, so that when you come back and look at it the next day, you're going to see it differently than the way you saw it the first time. And that's a good thing. So there is a process to the way this is laid out. The workbook pages are laid out in a certain way to allow that student time. Those workbook pages, I'm going to say this right up front, moms and dads, don't grade the workbook pages. If you want to set a grade for your student, grade according to tests, but the workbook pages are for the learning process. We don't expect them to know it right after seeing it for the first time. And they may be able to parrot back right away if they're good at that sort of thing. But the next day is more of an assessment of how well they understood it. And it might take the parent coming over and saying, okay, I'm going to show this to you again, and I'm going to model what the build, write, say should look like, and then give the student an opportunity. That might help alleviate some of that anxiety. I know Steve Demme shared that when you interviewed him, Gretchen, that it was a helpful thing to come back that second day, and instead of putting his son right on the spot to be able to teach it back, that he modeled several problems first. And I think that that's a really helpful thing. Help me out if there was something else you wanted me to share right there.
No, I think that's great, because that's a perfect segue to what I want to ask Kathleen about, why the manipulatives are so important and why we feel like you're not getting the most out of Math-U-See when you say, oh, my kids didn't use the manipulatives. Kathleen?
It helps them to see it. I mean, we call it Math-U-See for a reason. It helps them to see it. And I can tell you, my 2 boys, my oldest is the compliant learner. Whatever I put in front of him and whatever I said, Anthony, this is how you do it. That's how he did it. He followed and did everything. My youngest, Michael, was a why do I need to do this? Why do I need to use those blocks? Why do I need to, everything he questioned why. And he absolutely resisted the manipulatives at the beginning, very young, all the way down in alpha. He would tell me, I don't need them. I don't need them. and I would just keep pulling them out and I would model how to use them. And then I would do different things to help him to use the manipulatives. I would say to him things like, okay, you got a 17 for that answer. How'd you get that? And if he was telling me, I'd say, well, I'm not understanding that. Can you show me with the blocks how you came up with 17? I would do different things. And then, but what that did was that started to help him to say, should have been 18. I added that wrong. And then he would have the blocks there. And he was starting to see, especially when I was showing him with the blocks, that the 10 block and the 8 block, or like a 5 block and a 3 block, is the same as the 8 block. And it was making that equal sign. That was a big thing for him when I started showing him that. And then that was one where I remember then he would use the blocks. He'd be working on his worksheet and he'd use the blocks and he'd be saying, nope, I'm not getting the equal sign. And he was learning that they had to be the same. They had to match up for the equal sign. So he used it even to test himself when he was doing the worksheet. Did I get the right answer? It doesn't look right. And he would even go back then and use the blocks just to double check and make sure. He definitely learned that even though his first thought was, I don't need the blocks, I can do it without, he did learn that the blocks helped him to see the concepts better. And I do know for Epsilon, for fractions, absolutely, those fraction overlays, a world of difference, because fractions is a hard concept to get, a very hard concept to get. How on earth can I add 1/3 of something to 1/2 of something? That makes no sense to me. When you're using those fraction overlays, now it makes sense. It makes amazing sense. And he would tell me that, Mom, this is so much better using these. And he absolutely used them for fractions because, again, it made sense of the math problem that he was doing.
I think one of the things that we as parents fail to remember is what it was like when we were first learning math, and being able to visualize mathematically what is happening helps us put it on our brain in the right place. We have a colleague named Sue Wachter who often says the difference between using the manipulatives and not using the manipulatives is the ability to help your brain sort that information and put it in there correctly. And she says all the time, you don't need to use the manipulatives 1 minute longer than it takes for you to teach me what you have learned. And here's a place where the manipulatives provide us an enormous amount of bang for the buck, if you will. With a young student, sometimes they don't have the language capacity to explain, how did I get there? But being able to do as Kathleen has described and take the manipulatives and show you what they know is enormously helpful. And you would be amazed at how often that show part sticks in your head later, because the highest value of being able to learn something is to be able to teach it back to someone else. Lisa, you have an excellent explanation about Epsilon and the value of the fractions. Can you elaborate on that? Because I think it would be really important for our parents.
Yeah, the more I talk with parents about this, the clearer it's becoming to me that when they hit the fractions, it's a little like a perfect storm. This is the first level where things start getting quite abstract because we're dealing with numbers that are less than 1. So you can't see them. And the rules for fractions seem to be all topsy-turvy and standing on their head when compared with the rules with how you deal with whole numbers. So that's the first issue that we're dealing with, the first level where things get quite abstract. And now if you're dealing with a program, a grade-based program that uses a spiral approach, they're pulling apart all of those different aspects of fractions, and they are serving them in small portions over the course of 6 school years, as early as 1st grade, all the way up through 6th or sometimes even 7th before they're hitting it all. And that sort of disconnects all of those different aspects of fractions. So the students aren't making the connections between things. They're not understanding the why behind. And that why behind really serves a purpose because it helps us to know when we're supposed to use a certain operation, and the why behind it. It helps us to solve word problems more efficiently. We understand what operation to put in place when a word problem is asking us for something. We don't just need to know what the numbers are, we need to know what to do with them and why. And so what Matthew C does is we take all aspects of fractions and we present them in a single level, the epsilon level. And so now the connections are made. And when they use those fraction overlays, like Kathleen mentioned, they can see the why behind it. The sense that's made of it is because it's standing in front of them in a very concrete and visual way. They can see why they have to have common denominators when they're adding and subtracting fractions. They can understand why when they're multiplying fractions, they're ending up with a number that's smaller than both of the numbers they started with, which seems bizarre. And how could that possibly be? But when you can see it, now it becomes sensible to you. And so we really stress, first of all, that fractions need to be understood. And if you have a student who has learned how to figure out a problem on paper because they've learned the tips and tricks to solving fractions, but then they haven't spent any time with them for a while and they've forgotten the tips and tricks, or they're having trouble solving word problems with fractions, let's take another look at their skill with fractions and find out if they really are understanding. This is a particularly critical level for success in pre-algebra and algebra 1. And when we find that kids are struggling in those two levels later on, almost 100% of the time, classically, it's because they don't have a solid foundation in fractions. So it's really important to make sure that that's really done well.
I'm indebted to the Epsilon level of Matthew C because my sum total of knowledge for dividing fractions was, when dividing fractions don't ask why, just flip that sucker and multiply. And it wasn't until I got to see in the fraction overlays why you had to use the reciprocal to be able to do that successfully. It was a huge game changer for me. And it took away a lot of my mathematical anxiety. So here's a statement I want to, if you're anxious about teaching math, this is the program for you, because this is the program that will help you have insight into where your gaps were and be able to help you fill those successfully. And I think that makes a tremendous amount of difference. Ladies, we're at the bottom of the hour and I'd like to turn my attention to our questions. And I know we haven't gotten through all the information that we wanted to share with everyone. So I want you to take a quick glance at what we had to say and tell me if I'm missing anything before I start firing questions at you all. Kathleen did say something that I did want to circle back around to. She was talking about a singular answer for math. And most of us have been taught, math is concrete, it's black and white, it's yes or no. But being able to think mathematically means there's more than one way to arrive at an answer. And one of the ways that you can encourage your kids to do that is to teach them to math journal. And I have a wonderful blog post that was written by a colleague that will be part of your follow-up information. And learning the art of math journaling will be a tremendous difference maker, particularly as your kids step from concrete of the elementary mathematics into the more theoretical math of Algebra 1. So look for that blog as part of your follow-up information. And ladies, anything else that I sure that we cover before we move into questions?
Yeah, I wanted to mention something about wrong answers. Kathleen sort of touched on it a little bit, and I meant to go there earlier, but I think that this is important. I mentioned earlier about not grading the workbook pages, but there's something else here, and that is when a student makes a mistake, I think the reason that I'm saying don't worry about grading the workbook pages is because it's really easy to say, oh, you got an 85 on this, let's move on. You passed, so let's keep going. But we need to stop and go, what was up with that other 15%? And if the errors that were made in that particular workbook page are matching with errors that have been made along the way, that means there is there may be a gap. We need to be able to look at errors and examine them and say, what kind of errors are being made here? Is there a pattern to them? Or was this a silly, careless error? Yeah, we can understand that happens all the time. Kids get hungry, they're distracted or whatever. But if we're seeing a pattern to those errors, that's indicative of a possible gap that needs to be reviewed. And in that case, you do need to stop forward motion and go back and take care of that and fill in that gap. Think about math like you're constructing a building and you got to the 3rd floor and someone found a crack in the foundation. You would be wise to stop and pause for a bit and go back in and fill in that foundation so that that student has a solid and stable structure to their math learning. The other thing is, if errors are made, we have an opportunity here to start to present those errors as a chance for deeper understanding. And we've talked about this in other roundtable discussions as well, but there's a lot of different things that can be done here. The first thing is it gives you a clue as to whether or not your child is showing all their work. And this might be the opportunity, parents, to decide if this is a hill worth dying on, because, and I say it is, because later on in Algebra 1, this will come back to bite them if they don't make a habit of this. So the earlier you can do this, the better. There certainly is an advantage to learning mental math, but when it comes to the processes of solving a multi-step problem, showing those steps is really important. So particularly in division, we want to start seeing that, certainly in fractions and going forward. And so they can go back in and take a look at that error and see if they can identify where the mistake happened, and then try and solve it themselves, try and correct the error themselves. There's huge value in doing that, in helping them to understand a little better what went wrong. Secondly, if they still can't figure out where that error occurred or why it occurred, it's okay to go to the solutions and maybe work that problem backwards. Sometimes that's what makes the light bulb go off. And then suddenly they realize, I see what I did wrong. I see what was supposed to happen here. Now, they still will have opportunities to do those kinds of problems again. So don't worry that, oh, well, they cheated on this one by looking at the answer. That's part of the learning process. Sometimes you have to start from the answer and deconstruct it, and that's perfectly okay. And thirdly, if you are still stuck, we support the math. Pick up the phone and give us a call, and someone will walk you and your student through that problem. We want you to be successful, and we're here to support. So, but don't just pass things on because they got a passing grade. That's not the goal here. The goal is understanding.
Kathleen, what else do you have to say?
I was just going to bring up about hands-on math. So the point of this whole topic is, do I have to teach math the way that Matthew C. does? Well, we described to you what the methodology is and how it's laid out and how you can use it with your student. However, you can also add other things in. I, at times, would, for no reason at all, on a Wednesday or any day, say, okay, you know what, we're not going to do the worksheet today. Instead, we're going to play a board game. And I would bring out a board game and play a board game with my kids. My youngest son absolutely loved board games, asked to play them all the time. And every once in a while, I'd say, okay, instead of the worksheet, this is what we're going to do. I had a lot of educational board games. Did he know I was teaching him math? No, he was playing a game. So, when he was trying to learn place value, I had a game called Dino Math Tracks. I brought that out. He got to use little dinosaurs to move along the game board, and he was learning place value through that. When we were doing money, and then for many years afterwards, because this became his favorite game, the allowance game was the one where we would bring that game out and play that game. And he had $20 and, it was about getting money, getting $20 and you win the game. So it was about accruing money and losing money and, moving around the board that way. He had to add and subtract. He had to count with money. They give you play money. He had to do all that. Did he know I was doing a math lesson with him? No, he just thought we were sitting playing a game. So those are great ways to just, I just used it, not even because he's struggling, which you could, if your child's struggling with a certain area, bring out a game. you could use it there, but it's nice just to say, we're not going to do a worksheet today. We're going to play a game instead. And they're still learning math. They're still, because again, their brain is still processing through all of that. You're playing a game with them, but their brain is processing. And there absolutely was times where maybe, we were plowing through with math and I thought, okay, I think he needs a little bit of a break from the worksheets. And maybe we would play games for a couple of days. And then all of a sudden he would go back into the worksheets and he would all of a sudden like pick things up even quicker. And I realized, okay, I think he just needed a little break from our routine. And now he's ready to jump back in with this enthusiasm. And it worked wonderful for us.
And I think that is a very true statement. We actually have a colleague named Amanda Capps who wrote a blog entitled When to Take a Math Break. And she talks about playing games. And that too will be included in your follow-up email. So look for that as some more resources that we can provide for you. I think one of the things that's really important to recognize here is as your children build a skill set, sometimes as parents, we forget that in order to keep proficiency at what they've already built, we need to have some sort of gamesmanship or rehearsal outside of the math day. And this is particularly valuable for facts. We'll have parents who'll say, you know what, my kids had fact mastery and then we took a 6-week summer break and now they don't have fact mastery. Does that mean you need to completely start over? No, it doesn't. But you need to figure out what wheels are not screwed onto the wagon, what wheels need to be tightened, and those kinds of things. This is not an exegesis today on filling gaps. But if you think you have a child who is struggling mathematically wherever you have placed them in math, you see, because they have a preceding gap that has not been filled, I want to encourage you to reach out to our placement specialists or take a look at our AIM products. AIM stands for Accelerated Individualized Mastery, and we have it for addition and subtraction and multiplication. How can you as a parent, that's what you need to be doing. If you have a child who is diligently working on their math and then all of a sudden you see them making little tick marks on the edge of the paper, maybe that's a clue. If you have a child who's doing what Steve Demme calls looking for divine inspiration every time they have to come up with an answer to a problem and they're in their head doing this, maybe that's a clue. So if that's the case, then maybe it's time for you to take a math break by putting math you see on the shelf and using one of those interventions that you have behind me. If you have more questions, folks like Kathleen and Lisa can answer those questions for you if that is an appropriate intervention for one of your children. Ladies, I want to turn my attention to questions that were asked. And one of them that was most compelling to me was my 5 or 6-year-old son doesn't want to use the blocks. So I'm checking to see how much I need to insist on it. And I think we've covered this, but I think it's also important to address what do you do when you have reluctance on the part of a young child? So Lisa, can you answer that for us?
Yeah, I love Kathleen's suggestions. I think that was really excellent about asking the child to explain something better so that you could understand it better. And that's a really clever way to do it. Sue also has a great suggestion in negotiating a bit and being able to say, okay, I'm going to show you this problem with the blocks, and you're just going to need to show me that problem with the blocks, so that we're not expecting too much, that they don't have to do every problem with the blocks, especially if there is some reluctance. But I think that there needs to be a conversation at some point, and maybe asking that child, what don't you like about these blocks? There might be some kind of a strange reason that we aren't even aware of. But there is so much value to them. And we have seen this when parents haven't used them and then call us later on. And, we're asking some questions and find out that some of the struggle that the student's been having is because they weren't using the manipulatives at the right time. It's been a while since I've had a young child in the house, so I'm a little rusty in my head about anything else. I think maybe Kathleen's going to need to fill in for me here.
Well, I would just say, I use the different tricks in order to get my youngest son to use the blocks. Asking him to explain it to me better. And then as far as the modeling, I would even sometimes build it wrong on purpose to see if he could, and he would say, Mom, look, they don't equal. That equal sign was a big thing for him. Mom, look, they don't equal. You have 13, it's supposed to be 12. Look, see how they, clearly I was doing it on purpose, but it was a teaching method. And then it got him touching the blocks. It got him grabbing this block away and putting this block in. Different things I got to do, because the more I got him to see that I was comfortable using the blocks, and they weren't baby blocks, they were used for teaching math, and that, look, I'm using them to figure out this math problem, gave him the confidence that he could also use them to figure out the math problem. And again, even though my son was resistant, the more he was using them, the more he was learning that they help.
Absolutely. I think it's important for us to recognize, particularly as adults, if you have the paradigm of manipulatives were the thing the elementary teacher pulled out on Friday to give you another way to envision math. I think it's important to recognize that we have to suspend our disbelief of the necessity of the manipulatives and learn how valuable they truly are. I have a great question here. Do we need to have a child do delta before epsilon? And ladies?
I'll jump in there. I'll jump in there for that one. And this was something that was a surprise to me the first time that I went through with my oldest child through the levels of Matthew C. And I heard Steve Demme say these words: a fraction is a division problem. And I just stopped. I stopped the video and I went, what did he say? And then I went back and rewound it. I must have played it 6 times. A fraction is a division problem. I have to be honest with you. I have no idea if any teacher had ever told me that when I was in school. I have no memory of it, but I certainly didn't retain it. I did not remember that. And at that time, as a 30+ woman, I did not know that to be a fact. I know that lots of people know this, but it was news to me. And it makes sense because math is so cumulative and it builds in this natural sequence. Before a student can really understand fractions well enough to be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide them, they need to have a good grasp on division. And that's where the delta level is, where division is presented in all of its aspects. Again, we combine all the aspects of that one topic into a single level so that connections are made and that the concepts build in this very fluid and logical sequence. And so fractions comes after division because a fraction is a division problem worked vertically. And so we want to make sure that they're strong in division first.
Kathleen, do you have anything to add?
Just the same thing. Each level builds upon the level before it, that each level is necessary in moving forward. You're mastering one concept at a time, one topic at a time, and skipping it will come back to be an issue once you get to algebra.
I have to say that nobody in their right mind would do a long division problem with one of these if you had a calculator, right? Nobody wants to work a long division problem with a paper and pencil. But paper and pencil is where you learn the process of estimation. And that's a real world viable adult life skill. And delta and division is where you get to learn that. And Kimberly says, thank you, Lisa. She's 40 and no one ever told her that. So I too vividly remember when Steve said that. I had to back the DVD up as well and go, wait, what did he say? Because I don't ever remember being taught that in my academics. So as we go on, Kathleen, why is reading the instructions so important?
Reading the instructions because it lays the steps for what you're trying to teach in that concept. And That's interesting, because sometimes in customer service, we get questions about specifically the epsilon level in fractions. Why aren't we reducing? How come in lesson 1, my child is not taught to reduce a fraction? That's what I learned. Parents are forgetting that you didn't learn reducing right away. It's what you remember. And you can now look at a problem and say, okay, well, I know 6/12 is 1/2 because I know what I know. I know that's 1/2. So why can't I just tell my child, just write 1/2? Because the steps are necessary. They learn one step and then they build on that and they learn another and they learn another and they learn another. That's why reading the instruction manual helps to guide you with, these are the steps you're learning in this lesson. Again, as parents, we don't remember that we learned them one step at a time. We did, we just don't remember that. Stick to what they're learning, let them absorb, let them process what they're learning. And then when you go on to the next lesson, you're adding to it.
One of the questions that a parent asked that we thought was really important was, help me know what parts I can skip. Where can I skip, especially if my kids seem to understand? So Kathleen, I know we teach a methodology of zip, not skip, and we talk about how do you make sure your child understands. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So as far as what to skip within a lesson is the question?
I think I'm taking the question of I'm going to make an assumption here, and assumptions are always dangerous, but I'm going to make the assumption that this is a parent coming into Matthew C who has a child who has some proficiencies. So do we have to replow all that ground, or how do we demonstrate the understanding so that it says we can go ahead and move forward?
Okay, what I usually suggest is that you don't ever want to skip a lesson, because you may not know exactly what your child truly masters and understands. And you may be saying, okay, well, my child understands all of multiplication, but do they really understand every single concept within that? What I usually suggest is don't skip a lesson. Watch the video and test for mastery. If your child can show you that they've mastered it, great, move on to the next lesson. We're not saying you need to do 7 worksheets or, hey, do at least 4 of them. No, if they can show that they've mastered it, move on. But you don't want to skip a concept that maybe they weren't clear on. So just at least watching that few-minute video will give your child the confidence that, yes, I know this, I have this. They can teach it back to you. Now yep, they have that concept, they know it. It just gives both of you, I think, confidence moving forward. And when the videos are just a few minutes long, it's not really a lot. You're not adding a lot extra into it if you're just going to say, okay, once we show mastery, then we'll move on. It's just important to make sure that you're not missing any key concepts.
And I think here is where the lesson manual provides you the why. Sometimes parents will watch a video and they'll say, oh, I don't need to do that. That makes perfect sense to me. But remember, it makes perfect sense. You're, as my grandson says, the growed up. It might be a little bit different for you as your student. Your lesson manual is going to provide you insight into why, because there will be videos that you will watch and you'll go, why is he doing it that way? I don't understand. The lesson manual is where you're going to get the insight into why Mr. Demme is teaching a subject or a content piece in a particular way. Lisa, can you elaborate a little bit on using the test materials as the rubber stamp of understanding so that a student can move forward with what they understand?
Right. So am I still on? I apologize. My internet.
That's okay. Technology is a two-edged sword. We just are rolling with this.
Yeah, because there will be lessons especially for a student coming to us from another program where they'll be starting in a level, and some of those lessons will be familiar to the student and they'll be pretty proficient with them already. you put that video on and that student says to you, Mom, I already know this, you go ahead and let them teach it back to you. Make sure that they can explain it back to you. If you want to have them do a page in the workbook to demonstrate, that's fine. The test, though, is that rubber stamp. It gives them, and it gives them, as well as you, the feeling like the confidence that, okay, yes, I know that I have this material and I'm ready to move on to the next lesson. If there are mistakes, though, again, be mindful. The grade isn't the end all and be all of this. We're less about emphasizing grades and getting certain grades than we are of, has the student understood all the material? Careless errors do happen. I mean, goodness. And if a child is working too quickly, then maybe getting an error on a test is the consequence that they need to see to be able to slow down. If they're not showing all their work and they were trying to do it all in their head and they made an error, even if they understood the concept, then that is a good opportunity for them to learn, okay, this affected my test score because I didn't show my work like I was supposed to. Hopefully those lessons get learned along the way. Sometimes they take a couple of repetitions. But that test does serve a purpose there. And so it's that opportunity to give yourself and the student the go-ahead to move on to the next lesson.
I wonder, ladies, if you guys could elaborate a little bit. I'm about to wade into what may be a little bit of controversy. Why is multiplication skip counting not the end of teaching multiplication? And I'll let each of you elaborate just briefly on that.
Do you want to go first, Kathleen, or
You can
shall
go first,
I?
Lisa. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, well, here's the number one reason that we see all the time: long division. A student gets into long division and first they do their division facts, their single digit facts, and everything's peachy. And then they start getting into multiple digits. Well, for every digit that they have to divide, there are 4 steps. They have to divide, and then they have to multiply, and then they have to subtract, and then they have to bring down the next number, and then they go up and do that whole thing again for the next digit. If they are skip counting for their multiplication facts, then it's just like counting on their fingers for addition and subtraction facts. They are having to pull their focus out of the work that they're doing. And this is a multi-step problem, remember. So that process is being interrupted. And it's not a good idea to interrupt kids in the middle of stuff, number one, but that's an interruption. They have to go and get that fact. They're skip counting. They've got the number. They come back into this multi-step problem and they look at it and they go, where was I? And there's a number that they just retrieved, but they're not always sure where they were in that process. They can lose their place and then errors get made and it gets frustrating. The other thing that it does is that it burns up a lot of brain battery unnecessarily. And a student only has so much mental energy to bring to a task. You don't want to waste it on all of this in and out of the problem, going to dig for facts. If they have the facts at hand, the way they know their name, that they don't have to stop and count, they don't have to stop and think about it for a while. They can just continue on with the process of solving that problem in a very smooth and fluid way. They're reserving brain battery for where they need it, and they're not making all of these unnecessary errors.
And then I'll just piggyback on that and just say, this doesn't mean that they can't skip count. It's a step that they use. Just like for young children, they're counting on their fingers. That's okay at first. Counting in their head, that's okay. And then we want to move on from that. Skip counting, using the manipulatives, they're all steps that they're taking along the road. Eventually, they're going to move away from all of that. They're going to move to memorization. You want to move eventually to quick recall. So yes, it's okay to do the skip counting, but we're going to eventually move on from that to memorization.
And I want to encourage you, several of you had said that you are struggling at some point in your Math UC experience. And I'm going to quote Sue one more time. If somebody's crying, whether it's you or your student, it's time to pick up the phone and give us a call. As Lisa said, we do support the math. We do want to see you have success in your Math UC experience. If something's not working the way you think it should, sometimes that it is exceedingly valuable just to call and have a conversation and say, here's what I'm doing. Is there something that I could do better? You would be amazed at how that makes a tremendous amount of difference. And I learned something in a roundtable last week that I want to bring back into this roundtable because I think it's really relevant to the Matthew C materials. And we were talking about whether you're an external processor. In other words, you verbalize everything to process it, which is how I am, or whether you're an internal processor where all the processing goes on in here and you say very little. Matthew C is an experience that is intrinsically easier for an external processor because you're used to talking out loud anyway. So, hey, no problem. But if you're an internal processor, particularly as the math becomes more complex, your ability to say, okay, in this division problem, the first thing I need to do is estimate, does the first number go into the first number? No, it doesn't. Does the first number go into the first two numbers? That ability is modeling for your student what you need to be able to do. And that can make all the difference in the world in a child's success. So just like we said at the outset of the program, make sure that you are using build, write, and say. As a parent, assess whether you're that internal or external processor. And if you're the internal processor, if you're willing to process verbally, it will help your student learn to process verbally. Ladies, we're down to the last 3 minutes. I'll leave closing comments to each one of you, and then I'll have some administrative commentary before we conclude. Kathleen, what do you have to say to our parents in conclusion?
I just want to reiterate what Gretchen just said, that when you're using Matthew C, and if you're struggling, if you're not understanding part of it, if you think maybe your child isn't absorbing it, pick up the phone, call customer service. Tell us what it is that you're doing, and we'll give you suggestions. There is no flat out statement of you must do this on Monday, you must do this on, our program is not set up like that. As Gretchen said in the beginning, it is used at the child's pace. It's almost set up like a tutoring, that you move along at the child's pace. And when the child is struggling, okay, let's figure out how to get through this. Let's figure out how to teach them this concept so that we can move on. We have lots of suggestions. We have different things that we can recommend. So just give us a call. Don't feel like you're stuck.
Lisa?
Yeah, I love that, Kathleen. The other thing to remember is that because Matthew C was designed for homeschooling families, the elements that make up each of the levels are equipping tools for the parent as much as for the child. So there are answers in the materials that you already own. The instruction manual, unfortunately, is often overlooked. It is a wealth of information in there. There are indices in the back of the book. There is a glossary. There are symbols and tables pages. In some of the levels, there are mental math problems. There are extra word problems. Like Gretchen said, though, it often explains the why behind what we're learning. And for parents who haven't learned this way, sometimes they'll call and say, I don't know how to teach my child this way, so I'm just going to teach them the way that I learned. And, I think it's an opportunity for adults to be able to say, I can be stretched too. I can learn something new, and go ahead and open up that instruction manual and give a good read. And it explains things very clearly. It's laid out in a very clear and systematic way, and it's there to support you. In case you didn't know, there's also an excellent link on the Matthew C website up towards the top of the page. It says support, and there are a good number of articles and helps and tips and all kinds of things in there for each of the different Matthew C levels. There are general questions that are answered in there, FAQs that have been answered. There are even a couple of support videos for some of the upper levels and some tricky concepts. So if you haven't availed yourself of them yet, please do go visit the support center. But again, we are here. Our customer service team is the best ever. Give a call, and we're here to listen and to offer whatever help we can.
We thank you for joining us today. We hope we've answered the question for you of, do I need to teach Matthew C the way Steve does? And we hope that you find benefit in the program. As a reluctant mathematician myself, I can tell you that Matthew C has enabled me to have 5 college graduates, 3 of whom are in math-centric fields, and I could not have done that without the help of Steve Demme. Thank you all so much for spending this hour with us. Thank you for trusting us. We will look forward to hearing from you again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.